Kia ora, church. I hope we're all doing well in this wintry morning. Thank you, music team, for that. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, that was great. And we'll continue our worship now as we hear the message. God, in the words of St. Augustine, put salt on our tongues so that we may thirst for you. May we really hear what you have to say, and may your proclamation go out to everyone here this morning as we open up your word and wonder what you have to say. In your name, Jesus Christ, amen. This morning, I want to start with a tale from a Danish poet, Søren Kierkegaard. Anyone heard of him? Yeah, cool. We've got one, I think. Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, it's got to go like this. Søren Kierkegaard, Danish poet from the 1800s, he once told a tale of his true sovereign. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a glorious king, the most majestic of kings, whom was known throughout all the known world. He was brilliant, and he was in love with a lowly peasant woman, a woman hardly known by anyone who had lived. And she lived in the dirt, on the streets. And the king, though, genuinely loved her, of all people. Now, this king could have anything he pleased. Any resolution that he decreed was unquestionably carried out. When he spoke, it was as though light beckoned from his mouth. Every politician feared his wrath. Every foreign country trembled before his power. Nobody dared refrain anything from him. If he said, "We are going to war," the kingdom would go to war. When he said, "It's time to harvest the fields would be harvested." His word was immutable. The king could indeed woo the lowly peasant woman and have her ascend up to his throne. He could appear before the peasant in all his splendor. He could have the sun of his glory rise over her street and let her forget herself in adoring admiration of him. He could display his power and might, bring her to himself, and put on a royal wedding, one never seen before in any kingdom. But a concern awakened in the king's soul at the thought. He grappled with a sorrow heart. Would the street woman be happy with this? What if she never wanted this all along? What if she never wanted him? What if her mind wandered back to her old life and old street family, and in secret was sorrowful about her royal life? What would be the riches of shared love then? There would be none. How could he tell if she was just wooed by his brilliance or if she actually loved him? In taking this path, their love would be discontent. And perhaps even if the woman did indeed possess gratitude for her newfound love and was so grateful to the king for his closeness, the king still would not truly know. So an act that could only come from the depths of his true character, the king himself descended into her world. The king appears as the lowliest of all lowly peasants, a form of a servant. This form of a servant is not something that he puts on like his authoritative cloak. It is actually his true nature. It is his love that earnestly and truthfully wills him to be the equivalent of the lowly peasant woman. If you look at him now, can you see that he is the king? Is he? Where'd he go? You see, only those who vulnerably know him can see, oh, there he is, that's my king. He is the king, but he has no place to lay his head. He is the king, yet he walks as if angels are having to carry him so that he does not stumble. He is the king, and yet his eyes rest with concern for the dirty peasants of the world. As the lowliest of all, he must suffer all things. He must endure all things, hunger in the desert, and even be forsaken to death. to be absolutely the equal to the woman who he genuinely loves. His whole life is a story of suffering in order to be absolutely human with her, identifying with all realities of her life, including death itself. It is a love that suffers, a love that gives all, so that he may truly know the peasant woman, truly ask her without power, "Do you really love me? Do you notice me here?" Shamed and left to rot. Any easier way would have been deception, because this is who he truly is. So then what happens to this king? Soren continues. When an oak nut is planted in a small clay pot, the pot will eventually break. When new wine is poured into old leather bottles, the bottles will eventually burst. When the brilliant king reveals himself as the frail peasant, the vessel will, in fact, eventually crack. Now revealed to the peasant as a servant king, his true form, what a difficult sort of rebirth there is to understand. All too sovereign, a sort of resurrection, in fact, takes place, and he returns to this kingly, mighty state. Because it is less terrifying to fall upon one's face whilst the mountains tremble at the king's voice than to sit with him as his equal. Yet the king's concern is precisely to sit this way. The peasants are wooed, not by his splendor, but by his love. Now I can say, I sit here with my king in wonder. So this is Kierkegaard's king. This is my king. Is this your king? Back in the Old Testament, when Solomon was king, he rode to a ceremony on a donkey. When Jesus entered Jerusalem before his crucifixion, he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. Back in the Old Testament, when Jehu was king, people spread their cloaks on the ground in front of him. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the people spread their cloaks on the ground in front of him. Back in the Old Testament, the prophet Zechariah prophesied that the rightful king of Israel would return on a donkey, not a horse, to represent a servant heart rather than military might. When the state-armed forces tortured Jesus before his crucifixion, they mocked him, or so they thought, by creating a crown for him made out of thorns and then squeezing it onto his head. When the state-armed forces tortured Jesus, and when they mocked him, or so they thought, they clothed him in a purple robe. Purple was the colour of royalty that the kings of the Roman Empire would wear. These kings called Caesars would have purple on because the purple ink was very rare and very valuable. They dressed Jesus as a king. However, we cannot let the irony of this story pass us by, because the deepest truths of the world, I believe, are revealed through irony, which we'll pick up on quite a lot this morning. Jesus, who himself claims to be the ultimate truth that all other truths point to, is the one who is dressed up like a king by soldiers who do so to mock him. The ironic thing here is that through their mockery and ridicule, they are actually revealing that he is, in fact, the king not to be mocked. Here we have the king of the universe revealed as the lowliest peasant servant. So we'll switch to the next slide, please. The Gospel of John opens by saying, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God, was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and the only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." And then the gospel later on, chapter 19, same gospel. Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. You know, in a pack of playing cards, the ace is above the king. Why is that? Why is it that in a set of cards, that the set that we have developed over centuries and have had passed down to us, when we used to play with these cards, the games have the ace as a higher authority as the king. But nobody is above the king. But also in this pack of playing cards, the ace is also below the two. The ace is at the top and at the bottom at the same time. This King Jesus, through whom all things were made, is also flogged and shamed and slapped. Well, John chapter 19 continues the story of Jesus under trial by this ruling class. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Again, irony, you see. We hear from his oppressors that he is claiming to be the Son of God, not from him himself. Again, irony, you see. The immutable spoken word himself remains silent by his own choice. Again, irony. Pilate believed he can demand who will speak to him because he thinks he's in charge, but it turns out the one with the highest power is right in front of him. Jesus is standing in a palace wearing a crown and a royal robe, a king, but with blood dripping from every vein. Jesus didn't need to say who he was because who he was standing right in front of Pilate. The irony that the real king of the universe, dressed as a king, was standing there right in front of the ruling class as the lowliest of peasants, sweating blood. Now, in a pack of cards, there is a card above the ace, isn't there? Which card is the most powerful? The most sovereign of cards? Which is above the king? Which is above the ace? The jester. What jest is this? How is the jester more powerful than the king? A traditional deck of cards used to have a card called the Jolly Joker. And the Jolly Joker was the same as what we call the Joker today, but there are different faces of the same character. This Jolly Joker was a courtroom jester who would entertain the king in his palace. He is very different to today's Joker. See, the Joker that we know of today is the unhealthy, disintegrated version of the jester. When the happy, joyful jester, or the jolly joker as they were called, becomes hurt, and when they've been defeated enough by trying to get by and they're ruined by society, they turn dark. That's when you get today's dark joker. And so the joker instead wants to play mean tricks instead of bringing joy to people's lives because they're latching out by their hurt. So to be clear, I'm not meaning to mention Batman's nemesis here. Yeah, not the cynical joker that we see in our entertainment today. This morning we're dancing with the just jester because this jester takes on everyone else's hurt but doesn't turn against them as a result. The reason why I'm daring to mention here that Jesus is the king and the ace and the jester is because the jester is the king of irony. The jester reveals the highest truth of the world through their tales and their musings and their jokes, which are riddled with irony to make their points. In Jesus, there is joy for us, even in the horrors of his experience. Deeply ironic. And this is actually good news for us. Can you get any more ironic than a servant king? Two completely contradictory ideas. The jester moves language and meaning in opposite directions to rip open a rift so that we may see reality for what it truly is. Kind of like in Stranger Things, but instead of monsters pouring out through the tear, we catch a glimpse of the real world, where the king of love is. So this apocalypse happens. Irony, it pulls and it twists up meaning in different ways. So there's this uncovering, this discovering, a revealing, where the curtains shriek open and we can step through and see a window into Narnia. We see the truth about the way something really is. It is irony that achieves that. Who Jesus is achieves that. But an ironic moment, it only remains for just a split second and then it's over. The jester has told their joke. That small amount of delight is done. So the rift closes again, the curtain shuts, but we are left changed irreversibly because we have now noticed new truth. Perhaps for the first time. Perhaps for the first time we've met the truth, the King, and we cannot be the same way as a result. You are left with joy, lightened with less weight. Or depending on the truth you learn, perhaps sadness because of the state of the world in relation to the truth. It is only irony that reveals these deepest truths that affect us in our core so deeply, not just our mind is engaged, but all of our capacity, including our sense of joy and our sense of sadness. Regardless of all that, something shown to us is true. So this king, the ironic king, the jester king, above and below like the ace, what's his throne like? What sort of throne would that sort of king have? See, some kings' thrones look like this. Hi there. But my king's throne looks like this. One of the world's deepest ironies is that the throne of the king above kings is a place of public shame and hate and death. There is this crucifixion, in the words of Kierkegaard, the vessel cracks. Can you get any more ironic than a servant king? Actually, yeah, I think you can. And it goes like this. How is it that when someone dies, quite the opposite happens? What a twist of fate. Death died instead. When the giver of life gave his life over to death. Absurd irony. Death, by winning, loses. And life, by losing, wins. Yes, hallelujah. How is that for joy? I don't know if there possibly can be more joy, but in the depths of the worst situation. On the cross, the jester plays his final card. His last card that flips reality upside down and ends the game. So revealed to us this morning is the peasant jester king, who by his paradoxical power overcomes the hate of the world, joy can be found in suffering now, and life can be found in death. Man. Now, kings have a throne. Kings also have kingdoms. What sort of kingdom does this guy have? And kingdoms have citizens. What sort of citizens are these people going to be? Well, they're the oddballs and the lost, the broken. And we come together and we hail our broken king. That's what unites us. We realize our brokenness, just as our king too is broken. My question for us this morning is, do you belong to this king's kingdom or not? Are you one of his? Will you reject King Jesus like that Roman soldier and become a rebel in this palace that is his, saying, he's not my king? Or will you bow and kiss his ring and swear, I offer my allegiance, my Lord? You see, a lot of us would rather be our own king or queen. Today there is a belief in Aotearoa New Zealand that being free is about being able to do what you want, when you want, how you want. If you have access to more choices, which usually requires more money, then you become a freer person. Here, freedom equates to more choices. But where did this idea come from? Have you ever questioned if it's true? Instead, Jesus' freedom is not a little ironic. Because for those of us who are citizens of heaven, where the King Jesus reigns, freedom ends up being about restraining ourselves so that we are living within the King's purpose for our life, rather than stepping outside of the King's purpose for our own wants and choices. Our understanding of freedom is sharply different to being able to do whatever I want. If we have a Lord over our life, we engage in his activity of establishing his kingdom onto earth as we speak. And this means that we, ironically, restrain ourselves to his will to achieve experiencing heaven now, not our own. We restrain ourselves to Jesus' teachings, and in doing so, we become freer to become more assertive people. We become freer to be able to be deeper lovers of others. And it's only in the restraint of following his commands for us that that is achieved. I used to have a cat. I just recently adopted him out to my workplace. His name is Mercutio. And so once a month, I'd flea treat him, and I'd have to grab him, and he would hate it. And I'd have to block the cat door, shut the doors, and try and chase him under the dining room table and whatnot till I get him, and he wouldn't like me putting that little stuff on the back of his neck. Anyone else have this experience? Yeah, and you feel so bad. Or once a year I'd take him to the vet to get his shots. And he would just think driving in the car experience was horrible. He was just meowing, meowing, meowing. It turns out, though, that objectively speaking, my will for him is better than his. He doesn't know that a small amount of a bad time for both of us doing the flea treatment, going to get the vaccinations, will result in him not getting fleas and not getting sick. He doesn't know that. He doesn't like it, and he just wants to run away from my care. If only he'd trust me more. If only he'd know that my purpose for him is better than his. Often, though, God's will for us doesn't look like what success looks like in today's world, because it ends up being about giving your life up in service to others, dying of your own wants, and loving those who are difficult to love. But the strange irony, the jest, is that when you know you're in God's will, none of this matters, because it's such a delight to be so close to this King of the universe that it just doesn't actually matter. So there is a different view of what success looks like here when you're following this king, and it's deeply ironic. Jesus turned up to some fishermen and said, "Follow me, I will make you a fisher of men." How's that for giving someone purpose? Jesus said to a wealthy guy, "Go sell everything you own and come follow me." There goes his security. How's that for starting a new adventure? If you want to experience freedom, you need to let yourself over to be moved by the joy the Jester has on offer. Because their joy heals us of our fear, heals us of our shame, and heals us of our anger. We're no longer shackled by fear or shame or anger, and instead we live in a joy that overrides and implodes these attributes, which often hold us back from living a truly meaningful and rich life. There is a magnificent life ahead for you, and it's on offer to you. It's the will that the King of Heaven has for you. Who could know better? This life that the King of all has for you is the most blessed, fulfilled, and meaningful way you could ever go about your time on earth. But if you're not careful, you might miss it. You may end up too afraid to give up securities, too ashamed to confess and admit the issues we'd rather bury, too angry to forgive. We need the joy of the Jester to overcome these burdens. So whatever happened to that king on his throne? King Jesus was helped down from his throne. He was buried. And then this is a little account of what took place next. And this will move us into communion. Luke chapter 24, 13 to 30. Two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. All as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. That guy who was buried, who had died. But they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. Jesus is just going along pretending with these poor guys. "Well, he was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find the body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see Jesus." Oh, this Jester king, right? The irony is just too wonderful. These guys are explaining to Jesus what had happened to Jesus. So he said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. He just kept playing along with his joke. They were explaining to Jesus what happened to Jesus, and he was just like, "All right, well, I'm going to move on now." But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening, the day is almost over." "Oh, all right, if I must." Jesus is going along. So he went to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. If the communion servers could come up now, that would be great, thank you, and start getting ready to hand out the communion. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared completely from sight. That part's really important. As soon as they recognized him, he disappeared from sight. A moment happened, just a glimpse of a moment, where suddenly they realized who they were ironically talking to, and then he disappeared. A rip had ripped open, and they saw reality for the first time for what it truly is. And then as quickly as they saw God's kingdom of heaven, the king himself, the moment passes. He disappeared from sight, and we are left pondering and longing for more. In faith, we keep pursuing this king, and in faith, we wait, longing for the return of the king. So my hope this morning for us is this. For those of us who have been following Jesus for many years, it is that we get a richer taste of who this Jester peasant king is, the one we follow and serve. And my hope for those of us who haven't heard this story, haven't quite heard the good news before, that you would consider too bowing to this king, swearing your allegiance over to him and finding his purpose for your life. Because it is here that we step into the joy of the world. All right, we're going to pass out the bread and the juice now. Maybe the servers could just stand along here and people can take the time to come on up. And then after that, you can just go sit down and take it in your own time, reflecting on what you've heard this morning and wondering what stood out to you. And then we'll move on to some songs. And after singing, if you'd like to talk with someone further about who this Jesus character is, feel free to come find some of us sitting over here. And kids, if you could please go return to where your parents were now to take communion together, that would be great. Thank you. So everyone, feel free to come up in your own time now and take communion.